Kristen, you and I and our colleagues, unfortunately, we've all covered shootings as part of this job. It's become a sadly familiar assignment. We race to the scene of the tragedy and the aftermath. What's far less familiar is actually witnessing the moments of the tragedy firsthand. And that's what my team and I experienced last night. I'll just tell you from our vantage point what happened. We were on the press risers, which were positioned in the center of the venue as usual, just behind the seated section of the audience. We were actually finishing up filming a stand-up as the former president began his speech. Again, all as usual. My producer, Bianca, and I started to walk down the stairs from the riser just to grab our laptops when we suddenly heard those loud cracking pops that are now so familiar from that video we've been playing over and over again of that devastating moment. We, like many of the people that we interviewed afterwards, initially thought it might be fireworks. You know, sometimes former president's events have pyrotechnics. But when those sounds kept going and then when Mr. Trump stopped speaking, we took cover behind some stage equipment, again, thinking it was just a precaution. And we experienced the sort of rapid roller coaster of emotion alongside the crowd. It went from a standard political event. People were cheering, buying merchandise and food, dancing to the song YMCA, which often comes on just before the former president makes his entrance. It went from that to confusion and chaos as those sounds rang out. And then fear set in when we realized that this could actually be gunshots, something we never imagined. We were still taking cover when we heard those cheers from the crowd that you can hear in the video as the former president raised his fist into the air with blood on his face and was taken to safety by Secret Service. And Kristen, in those moments, for anyone who wasn't sort of front and center, who saw people get injured, one unfortunately ultimately killed, it wasn't immediately clear to us how dangerous and deadly the situation really was. So some people in the crowd began to leave the scene, but others, they stuck around. And we got back up on the press risers, reunited with our crew, who was thankfully safe, and we began reporting live. And one thing that struck me in those moments, it was after that some people in the crowd started to come to the risers. They started to get heated with the press. And this struck me as I was thinking back to these moments, because we've been talking about sort of the division and polarization that's an inevitable part of this story, right? And this crowd gathered near the media, started blaming the press for what had just happened, some screaming at journalists and getting pretty aggressive. Of course, emotions were running high in that moment. It was a chaotic scene and we didn't know the details at that moment. We were ultimately told to leave the scene in the middle of our live report. A Secret Service told us that this was now an active crime scene. Our crew had to abandon their gear. We made our way to the parking lot where there were thousands of cars that would ultimately take hours to get out of there. There was really only one entry and exit point. And so there was a massive traffic jam. And it was sort of in that traffic jam as everyone was coming to grips with what just happened that we spent hours speaking to witnesses. We were exchanging our stories, hearing their stories, trying to fill in the blanks. And pretty quickly, a picture of total horror emerged as we met people who witnessed the tragic death of one attendee. A man named Joseph that I talked to was standing next to the gentleman who was killed. He told me that that man died on impact and that he helped carry the man's body away. People described watching the former president turn his head slightly to point to a screen just on stage, just as those first few bullets were getting fired. One woman telling me that potentially the lethal shot was missed by inches, maybe centimeters. And this morning, the former president gave another update, addressing supporters on Truth Social, writing, "It was God alone who prevented the unthinkable from happening. We will fear not, but instead remain resilient in our faith and defiant in the face of wickedness. In this moment, it is more important than ever that we stand united and show our true character as Americans, remaining strong and determined and not allowing evil to win." Kristen.
Dasha